Hi, and again, welcome to today's webinar, Start the School Year Right with Innovative Approaches to After-School Meals. Just a few housekeeping notes. The webinar is in listen-only mode right now, which means you cannot speak or be heard. But we are taking questions throughout the webinar. You can write those in at any point using the questions section in the GoToWebinar menu. We'll address those questions at the end of the webinar, but again, it is helpful to get a chance to look at those as we go. And if you want to address your question to a specific speaker, please just write that in as part of your question, and it'll make it easier to direct your question to the right person. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive that recording along with the slide deck and any resources after the webinar. And we'll also be sending out a brief survey as well, so we really appreciate your feedback if you could fill that out. So I should say my name is Carolyn Waite, and I'm a program manager here in the No Kid Hungry Center for Best Practices, and I'll be one of the speakers today. As a little bit of background about me, I've been here at the Center for Best Practices for about a year, working on the Child and Adult Care Food Program and After-School Meals at the national level, and prior to this I spent 5 years working for a state agency implementing the Child and Adult Care Food Program. And I am very pleased to be joined today by our innovation partner, Tyson Foods Incorporated. And so I'd like to introduce to you Spencer Armstrong, who is the Director of K-12 Sales for Tyson Foods. And so Spencer, welcome.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. And hello, everybody out there, and welcome to the webinar today. As Carolyn said, my name is Spencer Armstrong, and I do head up the K-12 sales team here at Tyson Foods. Just a little background on Tyson Foods support here. Since 2000, Tyson Foods has been proud to support the work that the No Kid Hungry campaign is doing every day to help connect children with the meals that they need to lead healthy, active lives. Most recently, we have partnered with No Kid Hungry to fund a new 2-year national innovation program to support the team in executing after-school meals pilots across the country. As a leader in the anti-hunger movement, Tyson Foods is particularly proud to support No Kid Hungry's efforts to find new, innovative approaches to feeding kids when school is out, and we continue to be impressed and inspired by the results we're seeing on the ground. We're grateful for our partnership with No Kid Hungry and for the opportunity to build on our commitment to domestic hunger relief and awareness. We have a number of items today that we'll be covering on the webinar, including an overview of the After-School Meals program and a look at the growth, gaps, and requirements within that program. We'll also be talking about our innovative approaches to expand access to the After-School Meals program. Then we'll hear from 2 people who are seeing the impact of our work every day. Finally, we will hold some time for questions and answers. So thank you for joining us today. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Carolyn Waite, Senior Manager of the Center for Best Practices team at No Kid Hungry.
Thank you so much for that introduction to the webinar, Spencer, and thank you so much for your partnership in this work. So first of all, we thought it was important to just establish the need for this program and talk about the growth and need that we still see after school. So you may be familiar with the statistic that 1 in 5 children in the U.S. faces hunger. And that means that their families have limited or uncertain access to food at some point in the past year, with many experiencing more severe or ongoing need. And in some areas of our country, that need is unfortunately higher, with as many as 1 in 3 kids struggling with hunger. So you may be familiar with programs like the School Breakfast Program and the National School Lunch Program to help meet this need so that kids can grow up healthy and strong with the food they need. But we were interested in what was happening after the school day ended. So in 2013, we commissioned some research to look at what was happening after that final bell. And we found that the vast majority of kids from low-income families are eating something after school. And again, for the vast majority of those kids, that food is coming from home, being provided by their families. And we found that low-income families were spending a median of $400 per food for their child to eat after school. and the average was actually much higher, around $700. So depending on things like the age of your children, family size, that cost of providing food after school can be quite high. And along with that, 59% of the low-income parents surveyed thought it was financially difficult to provide that food for their child to eat after school. And perhaps most striking, 25% of low-income parents worried that their child didn't have enough to eat between lunch and breakfast the next day. So this is really where after-school nutrition programs come in and why they're so important. So we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what these programs are represented in this chart, but we wanted to show that since these after-school nutrition programs were established back in 1998 with our data going back to 2000, there's really been huge growth to meet this need of kids who don't have enough to eat after school to fuel all of their growth and learning and play. And so the blue and orange bars represent snacks, and the gray represents meals. And so you'll see there's in 2010 that meals or suppers were authorized to be a nationwide option, and you'll see that there's huge, huge growth in the past 3 years going through 2015. But there's still a large gap that remains, and for every 100 school lunches served to kids in need, there are just 3.5 after-school meals served. So despite that huge growth, there's still a long way to go in making sure that kids have the nutrition they need after school. Implementation of the CACFP at-risk after-school meal program, or suppers, has varied a lot from state to state. And so we have this chart here that shows what that difference is by comparing the number of suppers to the number of free or reduced price lunches served through the National School Lunch Program. So you can see that it is as high as 15 meals for every 100 free or reduced price lunches there in the District of Columbia. There are 8 after-school meals served for every 100 free or reduced price lunches in Arkansas and California. But in some states, it's as low as 1 or 2 after-school meals for every 1,000 free or reduced price lunches. So we have a new report that goes through all of this data in much more detail, along with a much more detailed background of the program and its history. So you can find that on our website, and we'll be sending that out after this webinar if you're really curious to see how your state compares and exactly how you're doing. But with that, we want to go into more detail of what this program is and how it works so that you hopefully can bring this back to your school, to your program in your state. So there are many child nutrition programs. Like I said, I already mentioned the school breakfast program, the National School Lunch Program. And so those are all authorized at the national level by Congress and administered at the federal level by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service. And then in every state, those programs are administered by a designated agency. But specifically what we're interested in today are programs that touch on after school. And so the 2 main programs for that are the Child and Adult Care Food Program and the National School Lunch Program. So there is an option for after-school snacks through the National School Lunch Program, and then there's an option for snacks as well as meals or suppers through the Child and Adult Care Food Program. And again, our main focus today is going to be after-school meals through the Child and Adult Care Food Program, since that is the newest program option and it provides the most reimbursement for the most nutrition for kids after school. I do want to note, though, that in 13 states, the Child and Adult Care Food Program is in a different state agency than the National School Lunch Program. So that may impact your process for applying for the program and participating, but in all states, these programs are available and open to schools and nonprofits that are providing after-school programming. And just to get a little bit more into the eligibility for these programs so that we can all start on the same level of understanding, perhaps the most important one for the after-school meals program in CACFP is that each program location has to be located in the attendance zone of a school where at least half of the kids are eligible for free or reduced price meals. Now, if you are at a school location and you don't meet that 50% threshold yourself, you could look to what other schools you're in the attendance boundary of. So for example, if you were an elementary school that didn't meet that 50% threshold, you could look to the middle school or the high school. It doesn't necessarily follow feeder patterns, but if you treated your address like home and you were wondering which elementary, middle, and high school you would send your child to if that was your address, that's how you figure out which school you should use for establishing eligibility. And then for schools taking advantage of the community eligibility provision, what you can do is take the identified student percentage of that school, multiply it by 1.6, and you see if that is 50% or higher. So you can't use the groupings or averagings that you do for CEP, but if you look at the individual schools, even if you're doing CEP, you're still able to establish eligibility for this program. So the next requirement is each program location has to meet applicable licensing or health and safety standards, and that can vary by state, but one thing that is consistent nationwide that's really great is that schools don't have to show any extra documentation to verify that they meet those standards. But if you are a school and you're sponsoring community programs for CECSP, you would have to look to meeting those standards, which are typically a fire and/or kitchen inspection. And then the last requirement is to provide regularly scheduled educational or enrichment activities in a supervised setting. So to give a little bit more detail on that last one, it can be quite a variety of activities, everything from recreational activities and sports to art programs, tutoring, study hall or homework help, computers, gardening, outdoor education, science. The USDA has taken a very broad approach to defining this. So, pretty much anything you can justify as being educational or enriching to a child, you can, present that to your state agency and most likely get that approved. The main things to keep in mind, though, is it does have to be age appropriate. So if you are serving a wide range of kids, you would need to have activities that all of them can participate in. You cannot operate the program for the sole benefit of a competitive sports team. So if you're a school, this couldn't be just for the football team and no one else. And if you are looking at community organizations, it couldn't be for, the competitive swim club or the, select soccer team or something like that. But the enrichment activity can be provided by an outside organization. So you could, for example, have the Boys and Girls Club or YMCA or another outside organization come into the school and provide that after-school enrichment activity rather than the school sponsoring it. And you can also charge a fee because we recognize that there are some staff time and materials that may go into that after-school program as long as your state agency determines that it's a reasonable fee and not prohibitive for the low-income children that this program is trying to reach. And then the programs can only operate during the school year and participate in the after-school meals program. You could always transition to the summer food service program, but for the purposes of CACFP after-school meals, it's just during the school year. But a benefit is that it can help programs that operate on weekends, holidays, school breaks, and other days off during the school year. So that can be a really big help. And in terms of the kids who can participate in the after-school meals program, it is anyone who is 18 or under at the beginning of the school year. So it's totally fine if you're at a high school and a kid turns 19 during the school year, they're still eligible to participate. But you don't have to serve all ages from 0 up to 18. It's okay to limit your program to a certain age, again, based on your activity or other program restrictions. And you don't have to do any enrollment or eligibility documentation for this program, which is probably the biggest benefit. As with all programs, there is some record keeping required, but for the after-school meals program, it's pretty basic. The biggest thing is probably attendance. So for every day, you have to keep record of the kids who come to the after-school program, and that can be done with a roster, a sign-in sheet, or if you have an electronic system of some sort, any way that captures the names of those kids who are coming through the door. There also has to be a record of the number of meals or snacks prepared or delivered, the meals or snacks served to eligible kids, so the meal count, and then any meals or snacks that you serve to your food service workers. And then, of course, menus for each meal or snack. And of course, you also have to have receipts or financial records as well as monitoring or training records, but these are just the records that you need on a day-to-day basis at each participating location. But in exchange for keeping those records, you get quite a bit of money for operating this program. USDA just released the reimbursement rates for the coming year. So these are in effect now from July 1 all the way through June 30th of 2017. And for each after-school supper served, it is $3.16 of reimbursement. So again, because there's no enrollment or eligibility for this program, all the meals are reimbursed at $3.16 per meal, regardless of whether or not that child would be eligible for free or reduced price meals, which is a great benefit to this program. And then for each supper served, you can also get USDA foods or cash in lieu of commodities valued at 23 cents for every supper served. So again, this is quite a high reimbursement for each meal. There's a lot you can do with that for providing meals and offsetting staff costs and equipment costs. Because you can also serve a snack each day in addition to a meal or instead of a meal, you can also get 86 cents for every snack served. And then if you are operating a program on the weekends or during spring break or winter break and you decide to serve a breakfast instead of a supper, you get $1.71 for each breakfast meal served. So there are a lot of options and a very generous reimbursement for providing those meals. So now that we have the basics down on this program, we want to just talk about some different areas for innovation, which will set the stage for the rest of this webinar. So the basic requirement on when meals are served, the main stipulations are that it has to be after the final school bell, unless you operate an extended day school that runs for an hour longer than the minimum required hours, and it must occur during the regular hours of operation for your after-school program. So if your aftercare program ends at 6 p.m., you can't somehow serve a meal at 7 p.m. But other than those two requirements, there are no other federal guidelines for meal times, the order, or the spacing. So for example, if you have kids who are coming in after school and they had to eat lunch at an early bell at 11 a.m. and they really want that supper meal at 3 p.m., you can go ahead and serve a supper meal at 3 p.m., even though that's not a traditional supper time that we may think of. And then if kids are staying at your program for a few hours, you could also serve a snack then at the end of your program time before they leave. So there's nothing to say that you have to serve a snack first and then a supper. So you can really do whatever works for your program. You also have flexibility on where meals are served. So there's no requirement to be in the school cafeteria as long as you're, on the school grounds or the, within the, campus or address where the program is happening, if that is like a YMCA or other community center. And groups do not necessarily have to eat all together. So if there are different activities occurring, kids could eat wherever that activity is throughout the grounds. They just can't eat on their own and take it off campus. So there's still that congregate requirement, but it doesn't mean that everyone has to eat in the same location as long as they don't leave entirely. And then there's also, again, some flexibility on who receives meals. As I said, you can't operate a program for the sole benefit of the sports team, but if you have a broader after-school program that offers clubs, that offers band, that has tutoring or study hall, things like that, then all of your athletes are welcome to come and eat. And there's also no requirement for any kid to actually participate in the activities. USDA guidance has said in numerous places, including the After-School Meals Handbook, that you don't have to keep track of which activity a kid is there for or whether or not they actually took part in it. The main requirement is just that the activity is offered. So now that we've talked about the basics of the program and some different areas where there are flexibility and room to tailor the program to your needs, I am going to move on to those innovative approaches and best practices. And for that, we are going to have Jill Panatelli, our Senior Program Manager for Program Innovation, take it over since she has the most experience with testing out these innovations. So Jill, would you like to take it over?
Yes, great. Thanks, Carolyn. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. So I'm really excited to talk with you about the work that the innovations team has been doing for the past 1 year, year and a half to test different high potential ideas for increasing participation in the after-school meals program. We did this through an innovation process where we gathered ideas from the field, on ways that we could increase participation, whittled those down to the ones that had the highest potential, and then tested those with pilot partners all across the country and analyzed the data to understand what is this telling us about the best way to increase participation. So we are really excited that we have this data to back up the recommendations that we're going to provide here. And in the spirit of appreciating the Olympic Games that are going on right now, we are going to talk about it as, what does an Olympic level after school meals program look like? So we're going to talk about what are those characteristics for each of those medals, the gold, silver, and bronze, so that no matter where you are on your after school meals journey, you can see ways to improve your program and increase participation based on sort of where you're at and what seems reasonable and exciting to you. So we are going to go ahead and talk about what are those recommendations. So, as you look here, you'll see the gold, silver, and bronze. I want to note before we really dive into these that these principles that we're going to talk about today, we have tested in the middle and high school setting. We have done tests in elementary school, and our recommended model for elementary school is actually a supper in the classroom program, very similar to breakfast in the classroom, which we hope many of you are familiar with. But we're not going to touch on that today. We did cover that in detail in our April webinar, which can be accessed on the Center for Best Practices website. So if you are interested in learning more about supper in the classroom, we highly recommend that you check that out, or feel free to contact us after the webinar. Happy to provide more information. However, having said that, we do think that these principles are also relevant for elementary school if you're looking for ways to increase participation without yet switching to supper in the classroom. So just want to put that out there. So let's start with our bronze medal program. So what we're calling bronze medal tactics, all activity students are highly encouraged to eat. So you'll see that we actually hope that the meal program will be open to all students at the school regardless of participation in activities. However, if this is not quite where you're at yet, we want to highlight the fact that in many schools only certain activities are actually being included in the after-school meal currently. So oftentimes, for instance, athletic programs are not included. It might just be some sort of specific enrichment program that a small group of kids is participating in and they're getting the meal, but not all of the programs at the school are being notified that this is something that's available to them. So the first thing to do is, if this is the case in your school, be sure that all activities after school are aware of the meal program and explain, especially, for the athletic programs, kids don't have to eat the meal before the activity, which some athletic programs obviously don't want to encourage. It can be eaten afterwards as well. So I highlight here that coaches and activity leaders can be really strong promoters of the program. Coaches in particular often are some of the strongest supporters in the school environment of this because they see their athletes, they know that athletes need food and energy to be able to compete at their highest level. And so if this is not a group that you have engaged before, we highly recommend that you talk to them about the program, and generally they will be ones that will really jump on board to get this going. So in our tests that we did in the field, even schools that did not open up the program to all the students saw some really impressive results, primarily because their coaches were such strong supporters, and because this is a pretty big population after school, is the group of athletes that are there. So that is our bronze medal program. Let's move on to our silver medal. So here, our suggested tactics are: all students are allowed to eat regardless of participation in activities. As Carolyn mentioned, this is a legal thing, but one that schools sometimes have not yet considered. considered. So we want students to know that that this program is available to them. We want teachers and administrators and everyone to be on board and understand that that is acceptable. But then we also need to communicate that out to the students themselves so that they know that this is something that they can do. So there's some key points here that I want to mention as we talk about each of these tactics. If we can go to the next slide. So when we did our testing, we found that in our pilot test that opening the meal to all students increased participation by roughly 50%. So it's a pretty big deal in terms of the actual numbers. This will clearly vary based on the size of your school and the size of your program currently. But in our test for our pilot schools, on average, that increase was about 35 kids per day. That's an additional $118 per day in reimbursements and commodities. So for a program that's operating even just 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, not even Monday through Friday, that's an additional $17,000 a year that you would be bringing into the school. So one of the great things about this is that the after-school meal is such a financially viable program, and increasing participation just makes sense, both from the standpoint of feeding kids, but also from bringing more money into the program. Next slide. So what are some ways that we can make sure that it's really effective when you open up the program to all students? So one of the biggest success factors is having an administrative champion for opening this up to everyone. So in our tests, we found that a supportive principal or even superintendent who is creating buy-in at the principal level is extremely crucial. And what they're able to do is address some of those staff concerns that may come up that food service may not have the sort of authority to address within the school environment. So they're really able to do that. So schools may be reluctant, well, maybe I don't want these kids hanging around after school, what's going to happen? Principals can both assuage those concerns as well as find solutions for, if there's going to be, an additional staff person present, if the principal wants to be there themselves. We have seen that in our pilot schools for the first couple of weeks to get it off the ground. It's worth noting that all of our pilot schools, this was a question we specifically asked them because we wanted to make sure that this is viable. And all of our pilot schools reported that they did not experience increased discipline problems as a result of opening this up to all students. So it tends to be largely a matter of perception instead of an actual problem that happens when you open it up. Having said that, of course, it takes students always some time to adjust to a new routine. So, being very clear about this is where the trash goes, and making sure that they understand that this program will only work if you guys are willing to work with us. That can be an important part of it, but did not create additional discipline concerns or problems. Another thing that an administrative champion can do is ensure the coordination of effort amongst all appropriate staff members. So making sure to talk to the coaches, to talk to the after-school activity leaders, make sure that they are strong promoters of the program, have all of the information that they need to have to advise students of where to go and what they need to do before they come to the activity or before they come to sports practice. So they can really lead that coordination of effort amongst all of the staff, ensure that everybody is bought into the program. And then finally, the administrator can ensure that the message about after-school meals is delivered in a way that reaches the most kids. So, they can take a look at the channels that they know work most effectively in their schools, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But oftentimes the administrators are the ones who are doing the announcements over the PA every day, and having the principal or vice principal be the one giving that announcement, it can be very powerful. Next slide. So another important success factor is the way in which the program is promoted. So in our test, we did a survey of students at the pilot schools and asked about how they heard about the meal. So we had roughly 1,700 respondents. Over 60%, the greatest percentage, said through the PA announcement. So this is highly, highly effective. 53% said through a friend. And then another 51% said a teacher, coach, or other staff member. Now there are other ways of doing this. So there are, you could put it in, flyers or posters or the school website. There may still be some benefit to using those. However, whatever ways you're going to do it, we strongly recommend that you are including PA announcements and that you're working with that administrative champion to make sure that teachers and coaches and activity leaders are strong promoters and supporters of the program and are spreading the word about it. And that will then lead to word of mouth as students get the message and start talking to each other about it. We do also have template scripting available on our on the Center for Best Practices website to, scripting, for instance, for those PA announcements or for flyers if you want to use those. So we highly recommend that you take a look at those resources that are available. And then finally, success factor, serving the meal right after the bell. This seems perhaps obvious, but one of the things that we noticed in our tests is that not all schools were doing this. So they were serving the meal, 15 to 20 minutes, let's say, after the bell rang. Unfortunately, we know from previous surveys that the majority of low-income kids are going home after school. They're not staying for after-school activities. So in order to be able to feed as many hungry kids as we can, and not just the ones who are staying after, it's really important to serve it at the bell, which can give them time to eat before they go home. They're not allowed to take it off campus, so they need sufficient eating time in order to be able to still do that and get on their transportation to go home. All right, moving on to our gold medal program. So hopefully Team USA in gymnastics tonight, right? Okay, so gold medal tactics. So here it's really about, you've got your base here of opening this up to all students at the school, and now you're going to go beyond that to some service alternatives. And this is really taking it to the next level in terms of making it more convenient and accessible for the students. Students are customers, and they like convenience just like we all do. And so what we have found in our tests is that being able to take it to the next level of convenience is a way of really maximizing that participation. So on the next slide. So when we did ask in that same survey where we had 1,700 student respondents, when we asked them why they didn't try the meal, the biggest response was that they had other things to do after school. They're busy, right? They have to go to sports practice and they don't have time to wait in a long line. They have to go to a job after school. They have to watch their brothers and sisters, right? So things that can help here, offering more than one serving line just to keep things moving faster. A non-traditional point of service. So can there be, a cart that is, closer to where the athletes are going down to the field? Can it be located closer to, where students are going to eat quickly and then go out to the buses? So is there some kind of option that can be provided that is not quite as traditional? Direct delivery to large activities can be really effective. So if there are, 50 to 100 students all going to the same place, down to the field or to band practice or to practice for the school play, can you have someone take it just straight to that activity so they don't have to wait in the same line as everybody else, and it's just a more effective way of moving people through. Another option is, let's see, okay, so allowing the meal to be transported is another option here. So I believe Carolyn touched on this, but the meal can be taken to go. It has to stay on campus. However, it can be taken to the activities where people are going. So is there a transportable option that you can provide? Could it be, a brown bag? Could it be a styrofoam tray instead of a hard tray that has to come back and be washed? There's a variety of bagged options that can happen here, and we have seen people do this even with hot meals as well, so it doesn't just have to be cold meals. But can that meal be taken to go and provide a more convenient and transportable option for folks? And then are there things that you can consider with transportation? So for instance, adjusting bus schedules, and this could be challenging, and I'm not saying that this is possible in all situations, but from our research into the supper in the classroom, we have found that, you know, there is increasing use of expanded learning time at schools, and so there are a decent amount of schools who are over instructional time. Could things be adjusted with the final bell time to leave more time for eating at the end of the day? Could there be later activity buses that could also take kids home? Again, could the bus schedules be adjusted for, you know, pushed even 5 minutes back to give slightly more eating time before kids have to get home? You know, could there be some streamlining of the way that kids are loaded onto the buses in order to maximize that time? So as you will see, time at the end of the day, you'll hear from one of our speakers, time at the end of the day, it can be very crucial to getting really amazing participation in the program. So whether that's, you know, changing the schedule, or, you know, just making sure that you're serving it right at the final bell, can be a really great option. So we've really, you know, kind of gone through all of this, but what I wanted to highlight here in terms of the benefits of service alternatives is that there are benefits typically for both activity students and non-activity students, and sometimes those benefits, you know, can be slightly different. So with the transportation or bell schedule adjustments, you can give students additional eating time before their activities, and that should not be underestimated. So we've seen schools where you know, the meal might be served right at the bell, but then students were expected to be at their activities 5 minutes later. Well, that doesn't leave anybody time to go and grab a meal and get to where they need to go. You know, and then for non-activity students, do they have sufficient eating time before, since they can't take that meal off campus? Okay, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And then finally, I just want to highlight, you know, the importance of variety, choice, and quality. This came up over and over in the surveys. You know, the great news is that in our student survey of those 1,700 kids, of those who tried the meal, 30%, you know, almost a third, said it was because the food looked good. So there were other factors here, but they specifically called out the food. Pretty impressive. However, of those who didn't try the after-school meal, also more than a third said that they would rather eat the food that they have at home. So, you know, again, students are consumers. They have their own ideas about what is good food and what's not. So are there things that you can do to make this food more appealing? We know that there is great food being served, but there are some simple tricks that, or potentially simple tricks that can help. So, you know, can it be just offering the choice of 2 fruits or a choice of 2 main entrees? Kids love choice, and they talk about this all the time. So, you know, in the surveys and the feedback we got, you know, they want to be able to choose things. So are there just very simple things that they can choose that make them feel more empowered and like meal? You know, could there be a bigger rotation of foods to improve variety? Could there be choice of something as simple as toppings for the meal, so building a sandwich, for instance? So, you know, these obviously wouldn't work in all models, but could be something to consider. Next slide. Okay, so I'm really excited to introduce one of our pilot partners. This is Katie Thompson, who is Deputy Director at the Quad Cities Area Children's Food Program, and they are the sponsor of CACFP, and they worked with us at a school, junior high in Illinois, and had really, truly incredible participation in the program. This was a 3-week pilot for them, and I want to say they had, on average, over those 3 weeks, roughly 70% of the entire student body participating in the after-school meal. Truly almost unheard of if you're not using supper in the classroom. And you know, what we saw as one of the major keys to success was the fact that they had such a lengthy period of time between when their final bell rang and when the transportation left. So I think Katie can tell us more about it, but 25 to 30 minutes. You know, so I think her story illustrates really the power of having sufficient eating time for kids, and the fact that there is demand for this after-school meal among kids, and if they are given the time to, you know, to eat it and to be there, they'll take it. So Katie, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. As mentioned, my name is Katie Thompson. I'm the Deputy Director at Quad Cities Area Children's Food Program. We're a nonprofit agency in the Western Illinois region of the Quad Cities. And basically what we do is we work with the CACFP program to provide after-school meals and snacks to different programs, projects, schools, everything basically going on around the community. And last school year we were at about 42 sites serving around 1,700 kids in the after-school hours before starting this pilot program, which was a major undertow, but super exciting, as Jill was saying, what outcomes we had from it. So I'm going to run down a little bit about how we put this into play and highlight some of those outcomes and then what we're actually doing this school year as we're getting up and running here. So when the grant opportunity became available with Share Our Strength last spring, we were really excited to participate. We knew that we were reaching a large portion of kids in our community through the after-school programs, but we knew that there was still a gap that we could be serving because not all kids are program participants like we've talked about during this webinar. We knew that there were kids there that were either going to be walking home, they just didn't have time to participate in a program, or they hadn't been selected for a team or activity. We thought we could reach out to them, so we selected to work with Washington Junior High, which is one of the junior high buildings in Rock Island, one of two, and we just really hit the ground running with them. We worked with the school administration and the Lights On for Learning coordinator in that building and started announcing to the kids that we would be at their school building starting on May 6th. We posted the menus throughout the building so that the kids would be aware of what food was to be served. As Jill had talked about, food items are such a hot topic for them. If it's something that they want, they're going to be in that line after school, or they'll go get their friends to take them with them to that line. So what we did was made those daily announcements, posted the menus, and we also put a large banner in the front lawn of the school so that the kids could see it, but also the families could see it as well. One thing that we experience in the Illinois Quad Cities is that there are two different types of families. There's the family that's truly appreciative of an after-school meal, and they just count their blessings every day that you serve their children. But there's also the families that like to sit down at the dinner table, and they want to know what their kids are eating after school and make sure that it's not going to affect their dinner time. So we did our best to not only let the kids know, but let the families know. And we did actually have a really good response from that, of the parents contacting us after and thanking us for the meals, and then also thanking us for letting them know, because they said a lot of times with their junior high students, a lot of things go unsaid of what's happening at the school day. We typically average 600 meals per kitchen. So this program we knew was going to tip us over. So what we did was we rented a space that we typically only use for our summer food program, and we brought in additional staff, and we were planning at that point to prepare about 300 to 400 meals per day. We thought it would be manageable. We knew it was going to be a little bit different than the typical meal that we served, due to the fact that we wanted the kids to be able to transport the food on the school campus. We didn't want it to be something that they had to have a cafeteria table to eat at. So we knew we were going to have brown bag options, which take us a little bit longer to get them packed up and ready for the kids. During the first week of the grant program, though, which was during that May 6th time, we ran out of food every single day. We had a great school administrator that was working with us to spread the word to all of the kids, and we ended up with needing more staff to serve the meals because one line was way too long, and we also had our service period open from the bell ringing at 2:50 until 4 o'clock. So this gave the kids that were going into a classroom after school time to get their help from their teacher and then get down to us before we left, and then catch either their city bus or arrive with their parents. We also have the advantage in this school district that we don't have a school bus system that operates for the kids. They take the city bus, they walk, or a parent or guardian picks them up. So it does give us some flexibility that the busing schedule isn't so stringent, and the city bus actually has a gap in its time before it gets to the school at dismissal time, so those kids had a little bit of time as well. So after the 300 to 400 kids a night and running out of meals, we upped our average. Our highest daily meal count was 643, and the last 2 weeks of the program we were averaging 620 meals per night. This definitely had us bring on more staff. As you can imagine, we were starting to run ourselves ragged during that time, but we were so amazed with all of the outcry from the kids, and it actually has led us to a place this school year where we're expanding the program. We're continuing our work at Washington, and then we're also moving into Edison Junior High, which is the other junior high in Rock Island. And also the news traveled about an hour away from our community to a town called Galesburg, and we have been working with them to open a kitchen in Galesburg and serve about 400 kids a night through their YMCA programs. So it's led us to have exponential program growth that we weren't really anticipating getting out of this 3-week pilot program, but it's really interesting to see the number of kids that are in need of the after-school meal and not even knowing the background of those kids. Something that I would like to highlight that worked out really well for us for community involvement too was that we did get, feeling a little strapped as far as our staffing being stretched so far during this period of time. And so we worked with the local fire department, police department, and the teachers. And each group selected a day, and they would come volunteer with us and help hand out the meals. So that did lighten our load a little bit as far as getting the meals passed out to the kids in the after-school hours. It was a huge success. Like I said, I don't think that we would have the organizational growth that we're having this year as far as going to a school district an hour away, that's 8 elementary schools and 2 junior highs, or bringing in this new junior high school building in Rock Island if it wouldn't have been for Share Our Strength pushing us for this 3-week pilot program and really giving us an opportunity to test something new and hopefully make ourselves one of those gold medal programs like Jill was highlighting earlier. That's pretty much the highlight of our program. After we're done, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to go into more specifics.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. You brought up a lot of really great points, and I think that was super helpful, and we are just so excited about the success that you have seen and hope that it is helpful for others. I believe we're going to do questions at the end, so let's hold on those. And we are going to move to our next speaker, who is Sharon, and she is the Executive Director of School Nutrition Services at Northeast ISD in Texas. And she is going to share how she has been using a lot of these principles of success in after-school meals to achieve great participation in her district. So take it away, Sharon.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Sharon Glosson, and I am with Northeast Independent School District in San Antonio, Texas. Some of you may have just visited our city for the School Nutrition Association Conference. But to tell you a little bit about our school district, we do have 67,000 students in 68 campuses. Our school district has a 45% overall free and reduced rate, but it's really, we have 2 sides of the district. We have schools that are very low income and 90% free and reduced, and then we have schools that are 10%. So we're really working with a variety of types of families and needs. We started the at-risk after-school meal program in September of 2015 with 1 campus as a pilot, and it was an elementary school. And then through the school year, we expanded to all of our eligible elementary schools, which was a total of 26 schools. This year, we're really focusing on our eligible middle schools. So this information has been very helpful to me. But we piloted the program with our after-school child care program that was already being elementaries. The program was really looking for ways to provide more nutrition to the kids. We were doing the traditional after-school snack with them, and it wasn't enough, especially for the students who were staying for extended hours until 6:30 p.m. for some of them, and they needed more food because in the elementary, some of them are eating lunch at 10 or 10:30 in the morning. but we really thought about the term supper, and we decided not to use that term for our program because we felt that it would imply a hot meal to parents, and it would also maybe lead parents to believe that they didn't need to provide any additional food for their children in the evening. And so our intent was not to replace supper, but we were really just seeking to supplement that nutrition after school. And so we decided on the term super snack for our program because it is a cold meal and we serve it right after school, which is very similar to the way that we were serving the traditional snack. And so the kids saw it as just a really big snack. So a super snack, we have a 2-week cycle, and we package the super snack together so that the offer versus serve component is taken out of the equation, and it's much easier to distribute. The kids, they pick up their super snack in the cafeteria, and we use the child care staff to distribute those snacks. And so our training with them is very simple because of the packaging of the snack. A sample menu could be a sub sandwich, milk, carrot sticks, and apple slices. So it's things that kids are very familiar with and they have a high consumption of. At first, the principal had a negative perception of the program before we started. They were concerned about high amounts of trash and mess and long times for the kids to consume the meal. And so this was a barrier to expanding the super snack into other after-school programs like tutoring. But as the principal saw that the snack really was simple, the kids were easily trained, then they were excited to bring it into their other after-school programs at that one pilot campus. And then, of course, that principal speaks to their colleagues and other campuses, and we started getting the demand for the super snack at our other elementary schools. And so that's how the program really started for us, and it's been successful because of that positive feedback among peers within the principals and within the child care staff. We've gotten very positive feedback from the students, the staff, and the parents, and we've even had local media covering the program because it's not something that's common here in San Antonio. The main thing, though, I wanted to stress was that our model that we do, it uses a very low amount of labor because it is a cold meal and it's packaged before the regular kitchen staff leaves for the day. And it yields a high number of meals because we have so many students involved in these programs, and therefore we get a high reimbursement rate from the government, high claim, and we're able to just pour those funds back into the program and make continuous improvements. So I highly recommend people trying this program, and I think that this webinar is great for providing that information, and I look forward to answering any questions at the end.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you, Katie. This is Carolyn again. So I just wanted to say that we only have a few minutes left, so if you have a question, please submit it now. And while we wait for a few questions to roll in, just want to point out that we have some resources available on our website. So that's the link. We have the after school section. You can also subscribe to keep in touch on updates to that, as well as events to hear about future webinars like this. And we also have a separate page for our innovation pilot. So we had one of the questions come in that what is the biggest challenge when looking to raise awareness? So I think that would be a great question to have for our panelists. Katie, would you want to start off? Were there any big challenges that you ran into when raising awareness?
Well, probably for us, the idea of getting the kids to be comfortable. It wasn't so much program awareness. We almost overdid it, I think, in sending flyers home with the kids, making school announcements, and then the banner and the lawn, that they might have been overdosed a little, that we were.
Okay, great. And Sharon, did you run into any challenges when raising awareness?
I think the main challenge is just touching base with all of those different after-school program coordinators and finding out what programs are going on so that you can make sure that they're all aware of the availability of the program.
Great. I would say also in my experience talking to schools that is a big one. If there are a lot of different activities, it's a lot of people to touch base with. But I think in terms of raising awareness among the students, those PA announcements like Jill talked about are a really easy way to overcome that since everyone has to sit and listen to them. This is a question for Sharon. Did the after-school care program staff keep the roster, or was that something that other staff members did?
Yes, the child care program kept the roster for their students. They were already keeping attendance, and so it didn't add any extra work to them. And then any other programs that came and participated in the snack kept their own separate rosters, and so we collected all of those on a daily basis.
Great, thank you. And Sharon, we'll start off with you for this next question. What are some of the most student-friendly and popular cold supper entrees that you serve?
Well, the sandwich was very popular, but other things came to light that were surprising as we started talking to the kids. Some of them really enjoyed having a hard-boiled egg as their meat alternate on certain days, and there were other days where the children enjoyed having somewhat like a Lunchable type entree, although it's a school nutrition compliant one, where they could build their own little pizza. So we had a variety of things, and I have to say, though, that each site has different preferences, so there probably wasn't one unanimous top choice.
And Katie, did you have any cold entrees that were particularly loved? Katie, I think you're muted, so if you can unmute yourself and maybe answer that question. Okay.
Now.
Oh, yes, can hear you now. Thank you.
We have a grilled chicken fajita wrap, and that goes over real good with the kids. Just using a tortilla shell, fajita meat, lettuce, and cheese.
I had a question. Is this an acceptable form of serving food safely, such as serving traditionally hot foods cold? So I think that's just a matter of the food code requirements for your area that can differ by jurisdiction of, county or municipality. And I think it's just a matter that they're, cooked thoroughly to start and then cooled appropriately within that appropriate time window. So for example, with those like cold chicken strips where they cooked to the appropriate temperature and then cooled completely within whatever the specified time window is. So that's definitely an option, but definitely check in if you have any questions with any, county health department or other health inspectors that you work with. Are there any final questions as we hit time? Let's see. If your students enter their number in a point of service system, do you also need them to sign in on a roster? I visited a school that was doing both. That's a great question, and I would make sure to confirm that with your state agency to make sure that everything is acceptable to them. I know in my experience, we accepted a point of service system that captured names as both a form of attendance and a meal count because it showed, that child by name was there. But again, since different state agencies can have some slightly different requirements and interpretations, it is always, always, always a best practice to check in on your procedures before you start that, but it is definitely something to explore. So unfortunately, we are at time, but if you have any remaining questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You have our contact information there. And if our panelists are willing, we will try to get you their contact information as well, since we know they are definitely our most experienced people. And so with that, we will wrap up the webinar. We thank you so much for your time today, and please do keep an eye out for that survey and that follow-up information. Thanks again.